Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Countdown Scream 2022 with me and Joel. Hi, Joel.
Hi, still no trailer, still no teaser, still no poster.
All right. Before we get into our topic, do you have any predictions? Because everyone's always asking when do we think there's going to be a trailer?
Well, I think we're getting dangerously close to the re-release of Scream now, which I think is happening October 8 in
Sweet.
theaters. And then there's a very splashy re-release of a 4K Blu-ray that week, I think, as well. So I'd be anticipating something happening around then. I'd say early October, keep your eyes and ears peeled.
Feels like this is a trailer that should be attached to Halloween Kills.
Right, and that would set it up perfectly to be attached to Halloween Kills. And so apparently in the re-release of Scream, that's going to be back in theaters, we're going to get a special look at Scream 2022. What that means, given your own personal experience of even being on the set and seeing nothing, will be interesting. But yeah, I think they've got to have a trailer in front of Halloween Kills.
You would think. I cannot wait until we're doing an episode of this show where we're breaking down that trailer frame
Oh
by
my
frame.
God, frame by frame, it's going to be completely ill-informed and wrong, but I love it. We're
Good
going to be
thing
wrong
is,
about
though,
everything.
we did come up with a topic for this episode that I think will hold us over until we get that trailer. So we're calling this episode Love Scream, Watch These 90s Slasher Movies Next. So we got a whole list. We each pick 3, and then we might have cheated with one additional one. So Joel, you're going first here. What is your first movie that you're going to recommend for someone looking for a 90s slasher movie that's not Scream?
Not Scream, but gives you those Scream vibes, and might be the most obvious choice, I think, if you're a Scream fan and know the people involved in this film and that. It's I Know What You Did Last Summer. Also, very timely because the Amazon series has just come on. I've seen a couple of episodes. I'm not sure what the embargo is or when this is airing, but I will say it's like the original with more vaping. And it's in Hawaii. So there you go. But I love I Know What You Did Last Summer. I know it's not the greatest film ever made. But this film meant a lot to me because it was in that post Scream glow. I think it came out the year after. I was hungry for a movie just like Scream. The ads were saying from the creators of Scream, as they deceptively do sometimes. Although this was written, obviously, by Kevin Williamson, I believe, prior to writing Scream. Um, and it just has so many nostalgic vibes for me. I think the thing that I love most about this film is a one particular sequence, to be honest, that I
I
think
wonder what
is
sequence that
what
is.
sequence could that be? It's mapped onto me currently, but it is the sequence in which Helen Shivers is brutally murdered, which sounds terrible. But I think the sequence really begins at the beauty contest where she's coming back to represent as the reigning queen of that contest, and she sees Barry, played by Ryan Phillippe, being murdered in the balcony, starts screaming. That whole sequence with the cops in the alley, ridiculous. And then right through to the dress shop and the fumbling of the keys by the wonderful Bridget Wilson Sampras. Just that jump scare with our fisherman under the plastic scared the bejesus out of me as a, how old would I have been? 13-year-old at the theater in Sydney. So yeah, I love and adore that film for all its flaws.
I'm right there with you. And it's definitely flawed. I think nostalgia makes it so that I can't stop rewatching it, but
Uh,
on my latest rewatch in particular, and I feel like this sets in with every rewatch, it's not that great, but I still love it. And but that sequence holds up especially well. It is still great every time I
oh,
watch
it is. And I think this is a trend with a few of the titles I'm going to talk about now, is that I think we forget that even within films that have some maybe, poor acting
it.
or some storytelling issues or some script issues, they really nailed some of the kills in a way that sometimes we don't get them in sort of better, perhaps more rounded slasher films that we get these days. They really put attention into the building of suspense and all of that. And I think that will be my next one I'll talk about. But I also will defend Freddie Prinze Jr. I know what your thoughts are on his performance in this particular film, but I think he gives good sort of confused eyebrow, and I think that's kind of all he's required to do. And I think that the idea that Anne Hess just plays someone, I don't even know how to describe it, who appears to be living in a completely different part of the country from the rest of the film, is a fascinating choice.
That's one way to describe it. All right.
It's yeah, it's wild.
I feel like I cheated with a lot of my picks because they aren't necessarily traditional 90s slasher movies, but I think they all have qualities that reflect Scream and, the things that were made super popular by Scream or super popular within the genre at that time. So my first pick is the Blair Witch Project. But before I even get into it, Joel, how do you feel about Blair Witch? Because every time I bring it up, like it is like an icon of the genre, I always run into people who are like, well, I didn't find it scary at all.
Well, they're fools.
Okay, good.
The Blair
Good. I
Witch
just wanted to
Project is
make
an
sure.
excellent film. I actually had heard about it through some early internet sites and ordered a DVD from America before it was released in Australia, and had the code thing put into my DVD player so I could play Region 1 because I was over in Region 4. And so I watched the Blair Witch Project before most people in Australia in my darkened living room quite illegally. And it scared me. I love that
I-
film.
It
So
is.
go on.
It's extreme. I think it's extremely scary. And I've also come to love the found footage format.
Mm,
I know we complain that it's overused and it's been done to death at this point, but I still think that there's a lot of creative potential in that style of filmmaking. But Blair Witch in particular uses it so exceptionally well. I love the idea that people went and saw that movie and were wondering whether or not it was real after.
yeah.
And like, I know it's not real, but there are things that happen in that movie that my mind immediately goes back to if I'm out in the wilderness or in a setting like that. And there's certain things that I've done even with my iPhone now where the visual of a handheld camera brings me right back to that. And I've watched Blair Witch Project more times than I can count, and it still creeps me out. It's one of very few movies that could make me, think twice before turning out the lights.
Yeah, I think it really is effective, and I think what's underrated in some ways about it is it's kind of the OG in terms of found footage films, and now we're at a level where I don't know if you've seen Dashcam, but they're certainly doing new things with the genre. Let's say that.
I saw a dash cam.
They're going, it's gotten bigger. Let's just say that. But I think what's really good about the Blair Witch is that core trio as well. You believe their dynamic.
Mhm.
You don't necessarily love them or like them or whatever it is, but they feel real and lived in, and nothing feels inauthentic about the way that their relationship develops and how they're reacting to the situation that they're in. And you're drawn in. It's that wonderful thing that they do in horror movies, like in The Descent or something, where you're so distracted by the drama and the conversation that's going on that when the scare happens, you're just completely taken out. And I think they do that really effectively. It feels really real.
Yeah, can confirm you like the characters in Blair Witch way more than you like the character in Dashcam. Uh,
That is a test. That movie is a test. It's like,
it's a struggle right now for me not to veer down that path with you. I have a
well,
lot
I
to
think
say
we
about that
might
movie.
we might disagree on it, but I do think it's a test of can you put up
Okay,
with a protagonist,
we
basically.
must chit chat after, but first, give me your next movie on this list.
This is I'm from Rotten Tomatoes, and this is the rottenest movie on the list I think that we have potentially, in terms of how critically received it was. This is Urban Legend. Again, I can't get out of my nostalgia, but this was a film that I actually won tickets to as a 14-year-old and went to the main, the big cinema in the city in Sydney, and it was a big experience. It was one of those first times that I'd been in a massive, massive theater with people just screaming and laughing. And it was a good time, and I think I was too young to be there. It was incredible. But so Urban Legend, I think, is obviously one of those films that completely apes Scream. I don't know if there are any movies that ape Scream quite so much as Urban Legend does, both in terms of tone and structure. But what I think it delivers on is one, really important, genuinely good kill sequences and elaborate and suspenseful and well executed from that opening scene with Natasha Gregson Wagner, and perhaps the most on the nose needle drop in the history of cinema, where it's turned around by Bonnie Tyler and there's a man in the back seat. But that's really, really well constructed, that opening sequence, and that beautiful, beautiful image of the shadow of the man with the axe behind her. But all the way through to like Tara Reid in the radio sort of school, I guess, giving me Scream 2 vibes. But the other thing about that film is look at that cast. Like, that is
Yeah.
a stacked, overqualified cast for the script that they were given, right? Tara Reid was really good in that role and was having a moment. But Alicia Witt, Jared Leto, Joshua Jackson, uh, um, oh my goodness, Loretta Devine. So funny and wonderful. And I adored this film. And Rebecca Gayheart. And
Yes.
that reveal, ridiculous as though it is, she goes there and she really performs. We'll say that. A few jokes went over my head because we didn't have Noxema Girl in Australia. So I was just like, what's that? But yeah, lots of love for Urban Legend.
So I'll rewatch this every once in a while, but admittedly, it's not my favorite of the decade. It's like, whereas, coming off of Scream and being obsessed with that, there was something about I Know What You Did Last Summer that clicked, and then there was something about Urban Legend that didn't quite click. But I still very much appreciate it. I think it has something to do with how much I don't like the microwave incident.
Yeah, well, I know you are a dog
I'm
lover, and
sensitive.
you're
I'm
sensitive to these
sensitive.
things. Yeah, it's kind of it's a bit of a tacky film, I guess, in some ways when I think about the way that it's
A little
done.
bit.
But it does, I don't know, it just delivers for me, and I think it's fun. And I think Alicia Witt is a really good final girl. And I should say, for both of my choices, I think the sequels, which are even less regarded by horror fans and critics, are have their moments.
All right, I'm gonna give you my next one that I feel like it's one that doesn't necessarily hold up super well over the years in some respects, but this is a movie that I watch all the time, and it has an animal death that scared the shit out of me when I was a child, but like now I love the movie so much and I rewatch it so often that it doesn't phase me. It's Fear with Reese Witherspoon and Mark Wahlberg. So I'll never forget the middle school friend that I watched it with. And it was like she was always my person to watch movies that we were not supposed to be watching. Meanwhile, my parents never stopped me. It's just, like I at least knew where the line should have been drawn. But
Yes.
it's like the middle of the night and we were watching Fear. And spoiler alert, at one point, the bad guys put the dog's head through the doggy door and then it like flops over because they chop the dog's head off. And the two of us screamed and
Hmm.
we shut it off. And then after we collected ourselves, we put the movie back on. But this is one of those ones where I can watch it over and over. I love how big Mark Wahlberg goes in this. I want him to play bad more often.
Yeah.
Like when are we going to get another Mark Wahlberg movie where he is an over the top villain because he should be?
He's fantastic, and I mean the whole cast in this film is
So
really
good.
solid. Although I've never really understood. I also rewatched this recently during the pandemic because I also love this film. It does. I think you and I we get the same sort of pleasure
Pretty
centers,
much.
except for Urban Legend apparently. But the Amy Brenneman's character, I don't understand her emotional arc or responses to anyone in this film. Why she's so mean to Reese Witherspoon and is so slut shamey and terrible. I'm just like, oh, this and
Well,
it comes out of nowhere. I get why, but I'm sort of it's such a sharp tonal shift at times. I think Alyssa Milano is really good in this
yes.
movie. That whole final sequence, if you love, like I think some critics at the time were like, it just degenerates into a standard slasher. I'm like, no, that's a pretty well done finale sequence
It is.
slasher.
It's a
And
great
that
third act set
house,
piece. Mhm.
that third act set piece is amazing, and I want to live in that house forever and ever because damn, that's kind of like HGTV real estate porn before that was all we watched. I adore that house.
All
you
right,
know,
what is your next one? I don't know what your next one is, and I'm so excited to talk about it.
I know. So I will say you've kind of gone. I was going to say you've gone highbrow only because I remember what your next one is, and
No.
then you put fear in. But this is actually quite highbrow. It's actually certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. But this is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is just for me a bold swing from one of our best horror directors. The best horror director, we can debate that, but in my heart. And this is 1994, a few years after Freddy's dead, died, whatever, which I also saw at the theaters as a 7-year-old. My parents were similar to yours. But
Good for
yeah,
them.
so this is the very meta take where Wes Craven stars as himself, Robert Englund stars as himself, and crucially, Heather Langenkamp comes back to the franchise to star as Heather Langenkamp as developing a new Freddy Krueger movie. She's kind of aware of it. She's dreaming about an entity. Things start happening. It's a real interesting dive into some of the themes that would be explored 2 years later in Scream, about whether violence is begotten from film and the
Mhm.
relationship between cinema and actual real world violence, as well as the sort of meta look at the horror genre by people who are in a horror film aware that they're in a horror film, in this case quite literally. We see the script pages. It's just a really fascinating thing, and I think what I love about it is, it's this incredibly daring thing for a film to do within a franchise like this at this time particularly. But and also I just love that Heather Langenkamp is so effing good in this movie. She's like so convincing and so great. And shout out to Mike Hughes as well as the young boy. Girls have a vagina, boys have a
So
penis, or is it
good.
reverse? But in a different kind of role here. So good, just like red rumming the whole time. But what I love about this film is that it actually made Freddy scary again. And I think that was really hard to do after 10 years of him becoming kind of a special effects laden Joker.
Mhm.
And then they kind of wiped the slate clean and were like, oh, no, this is what he is. But then at the end, they give the fans what they want as well. So it's
Of
kind
course.
of, it's a really, really strong, dark film.
I think it's really, really clever. And I wish, I'm not going to say I wish more franchises out there would do exactly this, but I
No.
do wish more horror franchises that continue on and on would find creative and smart ways to pivot like this. Because as much as, you know, I pretty much love almost all of the Nightmare movies and I'll rewatch them over and over, but there comes a time where you need to kind of inject the series with new blood, a fresh spin. And this very much did that. And it very much did that with something that I'm often drawn to, which is behind the scenes type
Mm.
material and commentary on film and more specifically the genre. Like that's a big part of the reason why I think Scream 3 works far better than most people out there do. I think it has some very valuable things to say on that matter. And then I can jump ahead and think about a movie like Leslie Vernon, which I think is a really sharp
Mm.
movie about the genre. So this is just another example of Wes Craven setting the bar, taking a swing, doing it with a whole lot of thought behind it, and it paying off big time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really sharp. It's really smart. But it gives you a fan service in that same way that some people complain that we get too many nods and stuff. There are some direct lifts. There's like the melting stairs. There's this
Hmm.
the tongue in the phone and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, I kind of appreciated how subtly that was done
It's
for me.
it's kind of the point.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's literally no other way to do this movie without that type of stuff.
No, it was great. And there is like genuinely great suspenseful set pieces. Like when young man, I'm going to call him, gets up on the top of that rocket thing and is about to jump off.
Well,
Yeah, kids in
scary
peril.
imagery. Wait, did you mean people complain about that in New Nightmare or in the
No,
genre
I
in
think I
general?
think in the genre, I think in films in
Okay.
general at the moment,
Because
there's
then I
a
was like, how do
no,
you
I know.
complain about that
I was
in
like,
this
you're not
movie?
complaining, are you?
It's
No,
like, what
I
what
feel as though
sense would that make?
there's a bit of a backlash at the moment
Yeah, yeah.
against too on the nose callbacks, etc. But I think this film was kind of ahead of its time in the way that it was doing it as a
Got it.
reference to itself.
Every time we talk about things where paying homage is done well, I just keep going right back to Fear Street, which has some very on the nose callbacks, but they work. They work.
Works so well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right, my
yeah.
next one. So my next one here is a Stephen King adaptation, but I think Annie Wilkes is hands down one of the best slashers of all time. So Misery is going on the list as well. Love this movie so much. I love all of the contained suspense of it all, and I just love how it's an actor showcase for two incredibly talented individuals. It's also one of my favorite Stephen King books, and it's just so nice that we actually have a good adaptation to pair it with because that's not always the case, even though it feels like we have had a whole bunch of good ones recently that I really fell hard for, but I think this is a high quality adaptation with two incredible performances and like there's certain things that I hear out in the real world and I only hear them in Annie Wilkes' voice. Oh, you know what? Here's a Scream connection for you. So I felt so lucky that I got to go to this. I don't know if you did also, but when they did Misery on Broadway and I got to see it with Bruce Willis and Laurie Metcalf.
Oh,
Joel, it was
that's
one of the
amazing.
coolest things I've ever seen in my life. I don't want to like get too into the show and not the movie, but so you got a Broadway stage. You only got one space to work with. So they built the house on a rotating platform and
Okay.
chopped it up into either like 3 or 4 sections so that every time you needed to go to a different area of the house, the set would rotate.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just like lights down, rotate, lights up. Like
Yeah.
sometimes he would move, like, or
In
she would
between, yeah.
move from room to room and blew my mind. So cool.
How did Bruce Willis on stage compared to James Caan on screen?
You can compare the two. You can compare the two. I mean, I thought he was fine, but admittedly, it was a Laurie Metcalf
Yes,
show.
of
I was
course.
perfectly fine with that.
Tony winner Laurie Metcalf, who won for A Doll's House Part 2, I believe,
I think you might
semi
be right on
recently. Yeah, she's an incredible stage actress, and incredible on a stage in Scream 2.
that.
But I'm definitely, I'm all about Misery. I think there might be some commenters who are like slasher, but
It counts. It
I think it
counts.
counts. I think Hammerer maybe, but I'm into it. I think that's one of the best sequences ever of a sort of um, the person is coming home.
Mhm.
You need
Oh
to
my
get into the
god,
other room.
yes.
That sequence is so incredible, and then the little ornament thing is that what I
Yeah.
remember?
It's turned
And
the
that
wrong way.
so finely detailed. I do not smoke, but I'm like, every time I finish a piece, I'm like, I want a glass of red wine and a cigarette. That's what I hope. And a legendary slasher director, right? I was behind that one. So. Has he done anything else scary? Uh, it's Rob Reiner, right? Isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to rack my brain for other titles and I can't, but I mean, he's also behind I think it might be my all-time favorite Stephen King adaptation in Stand By Me. Like
Mm,
Stand By Me is one of my top 5 movies of all time. I
okay,
am
that makes
full
sense.
blown obsessed with that movie. I have a dog named Gordy. I love it so much.
Not going down another path, but speaking of frequent adapters of Stephen King who did good horror, The Mist. This is completely not to
I
do with
like
this
The
topic,
Mist
but
quite
The
a bit.
Mist, Mist is an underrated little gem.
Also, talking about Stand By Me brings us back to Scream 2 with Jerry O'Connell.
I think I love you. This is true.
Success.
We
Success.
did it. We're knitting it.
All right. Our last one is one that we both wanted to pick, so we're making it our joint recommendation. Would you like to introduce it, Joel?
I'll do a drum roll, and then you can introduce it. How's that?
Okay, go for it.
The
The Faculty.
Faculty.
You
Yes.
know what I really am I'm realizing this right now because I have such a clear view of the thing in my screen. I really need a Faculty poster. Has
Yeah.
anyone ever done anything beyond the studio release poster?
I'm sure Etsy. There must be some
There
Etsy.
has to be
Come on,
something.
there are so many iconic sort of images, like from tentacles to Zeke's little weird hair thing going on there.
I don't know
I
what that
can't.
hairdo is, but I still
What
like
is
it.
that hairdo? I want it. I want it. I want him. I'm sure there's some sort of like pen in the eye situation.
There has to be
Yeah,
something. I
I,
love
I,
this movie so much.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm a friend of ours. I don't know if you know Marlowe Stone at the Daily Beast. This is
Yes.
his favorite film, and I recently bought him a T-shirt for the faculty. So
What was it? What's on the T-shirt?
I think it's just a studio poster. I think that was
Okay,
all that was
okay.
available. But
Still worth it.
yeah, I think again, this is kind of the Scream template put with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Kevin Williamson, and Robert Rodriguez. Do more horror, dude. You do
Yeah.
well.
This is one of those situations where I have a very hard time isolating a favorite set piece because there are so many things that I absolutely adore. It's one of those movies where whenever I rewatch it, I am enjoying the moment that I'm in, but I'm also looking forward to the next set piece that comes
Mhm.
after it. And when you look at that ensemble, like what an incredible ensemble.
Yes.
Obviously, when I did my ladies' night with Jordana Brewster, I had to bring the Faculty up. And then I just got to talk to her the other day for the F9 Blu-ray release. And when she brought it up on her own, I'm like, yes.
We're
Now
just
I
gonna
know this interview is good because you have simply uttered the words, the Faculty.
but it's a film, interestingly enough. Do you feel like it's not something that gets talked about enough? Like,
Well, it didn't do that well when it came out. Like, I think
right.
they were expecting Scream level success. It did not do that, and it's certainly gone on to become a cult classic, but, even when you think about all of the movies that didn't do well at the box office and then became cult classics, it's not necessarily, like, tippy top tier of that where you hear about it frequently.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think it really is deserving because it
I think
also
it is
captures
too.
that comedic, dramatic high school cult classic vibe as well in the writing and the characterizations. I think that entrance into the school for the first time, is it, when we see the kid getting like against the tree with his
Yeah.
poor guy. But I feel like they just like, they do that sort of intro with the character titles in a really cool way that sort of lends itself to that kind of movie and that we are sort of identified with back then. And I think the
Yeah.
characters are so rich, like Zeke and Josh Hartnett's character and all of them. And then Clea DuVall, and I forget her
She's
character's
so good in
name.
this. Stokely.
Stokely, yeah, but she's so good. And then the teachers. I mean, when Famke, who was like one of my favorite actresses
Yeah.
ever since I first saw her as Xenia Onatopp in Goldeneye, I was like, what is this? I need this in my life. When she goes from Mousy, when she has her "she's all that" moment, and you're like, she takes the glasses off and suddenly she's back to like basically James Bond again. I love that. And it's like Usher. Why not Usher? Just put Usher in. It's
Yeah,
it's
real.
it's a wild
All of
cast.
that is so 90s.
BB
It's so
Newirth
90s.
is like, who's the biggest Broadway star that we're gonna drag? And it was like, she was so incredible. That opening sequence is terrifying.
Like as we've been discussing this, I'm trying to think of what my favorite sequence is. It might be the stabbing in the eye part.
Yes.
I think I like that, but I also really love the tension when all right, to back up a little. Another thing that I think this movie does really well that I think is still very valuable even with modern horror movies is how successfully it makes that group of friends slash not friends people that you want to hang out with, and
Yeah.
it gives you that like, who is my favorite, who would I be most like that kind of quality to it, and then the pick 'em off suspense. But I think they do that really well. And then I also think they lean into the suspense of like who's been infected incredibly well. And
Mm,
I think we see peak tension in that respect in that scene in Zeke's lab when they're
yeah,
passing
so
around
good.
the pens. I love how that's shot. And oh, the suspense level of the movie goes through the roof for me in that particular moment.
Agree. I think that is a great sequence. I also appreciate that this film, to me, doesn't lose it when the monster comes, if you know what I mean. Like, I think so
Yeah.
many of these films, particularly if they're films where it's grounded for most of it, and then suddenly for the last 10 minutes, it's special effects monster, it just kind of and I think the special effects actually hold up relatively well. But I
They
think
do.
from the moment we find out who it is, the ridiculous, the bleachers, the pool, all that stuff, it maintains. I think maybe it's not at the level of the pen sequence, but it never falls apart, and I really really appreciate that. And it also has an eye for the absurd, which I like with
I feel like all the
the
visuals
Femke
are
head.
flooding back to me now. Like her with the
Yeah,
little legs. I love that.
which is amazing. She's just like her eyes are like, yeah,
It's not even a death scene, but a visual that I could never get out of my head after seeing it is when Stokely has her like legs pulled out from under her and like smacks her head on the floor and you see the
yes,
blood spit out. And then also Robert Patrick and the football team just standing out there
yes.
with their
It's
mouths
so
open.
it's so effective, and just even like the visualization of when I forget the actress's name, but the one who ends up being the new girl in
Oh,
town.
I can't recall
Um,
her name either.
let's call her the killer, the queen bee, the alien. When she's like walking naked down in the locker room, right? And there's just that shadow sort of reflection of just the shadow of tentacles sort of following behind her. It's very
Yeah.
effectively done.
It's very a lot of stuff that is like high production value and
Mm,
real quality work, I think. I mean, this isn't just a cult classic from the 90s. I think this is a really solid movie that should just be
yeah,
generally getting more credit than it does.
absolutely. I think of all the films that we've talked about today in terms of rewatchability and like personal favorite, probably The Faculty. Um,
If I had
for
to pick
me,
one movie on this list that we just came up with to watch right now, it would be The Faculty.
yeah. Like Blair Witch is great. I've got to be in a mood. I know we did last summer. Maybe it's because I'm watching the series and I'm like, I don't want to watch any more of this. But yeah, no, that's the one that I'm like, I would happily return to that once a month if need be.
All right. Let's close this out so we
Mhm.
can blab off camera about Dashcam. Before we say goodbye to everyone, tell the viewers where they can find your wonderful work.
Sure. Well, you can find all of my stuff and my team stuff at rottentomatoes.com. Follow us on all social at Rotten Tomatoes, or find us on your smart TV at the Rotten Tomatoes channel. We're kind of everywhere, bit of a brand.
As it should be. You guys do great work. I'll tease. How about Ladies' Night? I don't know what's going to be available when you're watching this episode, but it could be Amy Lou Wood from Sex Education, who is phenomenal. She is such a scene stealer in that show. Caitlin Deaver, who's in Dear Evan Hansen, who is also phenomenal and one of my favorite people on this planet to talk to. And Kate Siegel from Midnight Mass. I've never gotten to interview her before, and
Oh my
doing a
God.
ladies' night with her, like, it didn't just meet my expectations for talking about her filmography, it far surpassed them. She is lovely.
And it's not a 90s slasher, but watch Hush. If you like Scream, watch Hush.
Excellent recommendation. All right, guess what, guys? I still don't have like a cutesy outro to give you. So thank you for watching Scream, Countdown to Scream 2022. We'll see you next time.